Today, Chairman Adam Schiff said the impeachment inquiry will not wait for judges to order Trump administration officials to testify. Instead, Chairman Schiff and the impeachment investigative committees will treat the refusal to testify as obstruction of Congress, which could then become an article of impeachment against Donald Trump.
This will be further evidence of an effort by the administration to obstruct the lawful and constitutional duties of Congress. This will only further add to the body of evidence on a potential obstruction of Congress charge against the president. I will say this, it's quite obvious, and we fully expected this. We have seen a series of shifting, ever-changing rationales for this campaign of obstruction.
Joining us now is Laurence Tribe, Harvard Law Professor of Constitutional Law. Professor Tribe, I want to get your reaction to what Chairman Schiff is saying there, especially since you are the co-author of the book, To End the Presidency, The Power of Impeachment. Is this a possible way to go, to simply say they're refusing to testify rather than try to push this through the courts and take months to get an order to testify? We're simply going to treat this as an obstruction of Congress and possibly create an article of impeachment out of this behavior.
I think Chairman Schiff is exactly right. It's exactly the way to go. There's no reason to drag things out in the courts. The precedent of Richard Nixon is clear. Obstructing Congress when it performs its solemn function of investigating a president to see whether articles of impeachment are justified is itself an impeachable offense. Otherwise, the entire system would collapse. If a president could do what this president is doing, which is even more extreme than what Richard Nixon did, and try to get everyone who has anything to do with the matter to just clam up, then we couldn't really get to the bottom of everything. Now, happily, in this case, Ambassador Yovanovitch and others have agreed to testify so that the president's stone wall has to some extent collapsed. But that doesn't prevent the Congress from deciding that building that wall was an obstruction of Congress, itself a high crime and misdemeanor.
I want to ask you about the state of the evidence, actually. This is something that Mark Meadows said, not in the depositions where he said next to nothing, but he said to reporters that even if President Trump made the request for an investigation of Joe Biden, it appears that Ukraine did not deliver that investigation. Therefore, there's no offense.
Well, that's crazy. It's like saying that somebody who tries to rob a bank and gets caught halfway is not a bank robber. It's simply not the law. The law is clear that attempting to interfere with the proper functions of government and trying to shake down a foreign government, which is our ally, by preventing it from defending itself against an adversary, unless it does your bidding and helps you get reelected and digs up dirt and does various things in your own personal favor, that is an abuse of power. It's a betrayal of the president's oath, and it's corrupt. And the fact that he's not succeeded in every way in doing it just doesn't matter. He's clearly committed a high crime and misdemeanor, and the evidence is overwhelming and unquestioned that that's exactly what he's done.
Professor Tribe, I'd like to squeeze in a commercial break and come back with Chief Judge Robert Katzmann's extraordinary opinion today, which is going to go straight to the Supreme Court, apparently, in which he wrote the unanimous opinion saying that, yes, President Trump's tax returns must be handed over to Manhattan prosecutors. We're going to discuss that right after this break. Prosecutors are one very big step closer to Donald Trump's tax returns tonight. A federal appeals court in New York unanimously ruled that President Trump's accounting firm must turn over 8 years of his personal and corporate tax returns to Manhattan prosecutors. Donald Trump's attorneys have argued that as president, He is completely immune, not only from criminal prosecution, but from investigations. In the opinion today, written by Robert Katzman, the chief judge of the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, the court said, we are not faced in this case with the president's arrest or imprisonment or with an order compelling him to attend court at a particular time or place, or indeed with an order that compels the president himself to do anything. The subpoena at issue is directed not to the president, but to his accountants. Compliance does not require the president to do anything at all. The president's lawyer announced they will appeal the case to the United States Supreme Court. Constitutional law professor Laurence Tribe is back with us. And Professor Tribe, one thing I've been struck by in this case is the speed. This is really showing swift justice. The lawsuit, Donald Trump sued on September 19th. That's when he filed suit to try to stop these returns. 4 days later, the district court heard oral arguments. Less than 2 weeks after that, Judge Marrero issued a 75-page decision, which the appeals court hears the arguments on less than 2 weeks after that. And then less than 2 weeks after the arguments, you have Judge Katzman with a 35-page opinion today upholding the lower court and saying, yes, they must hand these over. And in nowhere in these two decisions does there seem to be any space for the Supreme Court to rule in another direction.
I think that's clearly right. Judge Marrero wrote a brilliant decision, making it very easy for the Court of Appeals to reject the quite absurd position by the president's lawyers that just being president means you can't be investigated, even for your tax violations, your criminal activity, when a grand jury, a state grand jury, is investigating the matter. It was an extreme position, and the Court of Appeals rendered so narrow a ruling that there is no basis at all for the U.S. Supreme Court to disagree. I think it will not take much time for the Supreme Court to toss this case out, although courts do not always act as swiftly as the federal courts in New York have acted. So I think the key thing to remember is that nothing about the impeachment proceedings needs to await the judicial rulings. These tax returns will come out. Whether they come out before or after the president is impeached is almost a sidelight, not a matter of great significance.
I noticed that Judge Katzman's ruling was very narrow, and he emphasized that. He actually used the word narrow in describing it. And isn't that a judicial strategy when you're handing it to the court above to give the Supreme Court a very narrow case to rule on?
Right, because the only way the Supreme Court could find any hook to reverse is by looking at broad implications of this ruling, but the ruling itself is so indisputably correct that no one of the 9 justices could plausibly come up with any reason to reverse it. And the Supreme Court has often said we sit to review judgments, not to write elaborate opinions and essays. There's nothing in this judgment for the Supreme Court to disagree with.
It seems to me, if this case did not involve the President of the United States, that the Supreme Court would be very unlikely to even take it.
I don't think they'll take it anyway. The fact that it involves the president gives them an additional reason not to, because for the court to jump into a politically deep thicket and a swamp of sorts, when the legal ruling is clear, convincing, and unmistakably correct, would be to invite a political mud fight that the court doesn't need and doesn't want.
So you think it's possible they won't even grant certiorari, the Supreme Court won't even choose to hear this case?
I think that's more likely than not. And if they did hear it, they would clearly affirm. But I think the most likely thing is simply not agreeing to hear it at all.
Professor Laurence Tribe, thank you very much for your guidance tonight.
Thank
I really
you.
appreciate it. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.